In this video, I'll demonstrate a few approaches that allow Arc-enabled servers to share the same Azure subscription, where Defender for servers as well as Defender for SQL servers may be enabled, while selectively not enabling Defender on the Arc-enabled servers that are added to that subscription. This could also perhaps apply to any other Azure VMs, native Azure VMs, that maybe you want to selectively leave out of enablement for Defender for servers, or if SQL servers, Defender for SQL. Okay, so when it comes to specifically Arc-enabled servers, from a Defender perspective, there's really two enablements of Defender that matter the most. That is Defender for servers, as well as Defender for SQL servers. And so if I look at my subscription here and I navigate over to my Defender for Cloud configuration settings, and I look at the environment settings under management, this is where I would go to at the tenant level, the management group level, in this case, the subscription level, configure all of the various different plans and options to enable or not enable certain Defender functionalities. So the first one we'll talk about is Defender for Server, and so this one is done via this plan list here, and specifically this one for servers. So if you look at this plan, it's pretty straightforward. There's two plans to choose from. There's rather three options. Don't enable this thing at all, or enable it, but enable what we call P1 or P2. So as you can see in my particular subscription, I've enabled the biggest one, the one that includes everything for servers, and that's Plan 2. We could do the same for Plan 1. So we have this enabled in the subscription, and what that means is that anything that's a server within that subscription, we are going to ensure that the MDE extension, the Microsoft Defender endpoint extension that allows those servers to be protected by Defender, is installed and connected. This would also include Arc-enabled servers along with the native Azure VMs. And so what do? We have to find a way, if I want to deploy Arc-enabled servers into this subscription, the whole point is I want to introduce my Arc-enabled servers, and maybe for at least the moment, I don't yet want to enable them for Defender P2, or maybe some of them I want to and some of them I don't. So how do we go about doing this? The good news is that there is a built-in Azure policy that is of the options to allow this is probably the best. And so I have links in the blog for this, but if you go to this site, and I've got the links in there, this basically talks about the various options for Defender for servers and how to turn this on. And so it starts with, hey, if you want to enable it, just hit that button, set it on, like I just showed you that's in my subscription. So you get that setting here. But then it goes on to say, well, hey, look, maybe I want to allow for everything, but I want to exclude some specific resources. So then it goes on to talk about how to do that. And there's some examples and things you can use using REST API, a couple sample scripts in here, but it also includes a few Azure policies. We have some built-in policies that allow you to do this. And so if I scroll down to this, these are the two. There's one for using a resource tag, so disable the plan using Azure policy for resource tag. There's also another policy that's per resource that you can just maybe apply and enforce towards a specific resource group or resource groups within the Azure subscription. I prefer this one, so I've set this one up already. So if I go back to my subscription, and let's start with the policies I have in place in my particular subscription. So if I go in here and I navigate down to all the wonderful policies I have and enforcement in my subscription, the one I'm looking for is that particular built-in one. And I didn't really rename it, so it should be in here. That basically says, there it is. No, yeah, this one, configure Azure Defender. Let me go ahead and click on it. Configure Azure Defender for servers to be disabled for resource level with the selected tag. And so if I look at this assignment that I've assigned, essentially I just used this as a built-in thing, but I just had to deploy it, and I had to tell it, hey, only apply this to this particular tag, and I'll show you here in a second. I've got a few servers with this no defender tag, and I set the value of that tag to yes. And so the effect of this is, quote, deploy if not exist. Now in this case, it's kind of the inverse. Deploy if not exist means hey, I know you want to deploy it because the subscription is telling you you need to put MDE down, you need that extension, but deploy if not exist means do the opposite, which means don't ever put down the extension, and therefore it will never be enabled. So now that I have this in place, if I go back to my Azure Arc things and I look at machines, I've got various machines here. Let's start with one where I've got this. I essentially want this enabled, so that I don't have the tag here for that. And if I go down to any of my given either Arc enabled machines or native Azure virtual machines, you should see this MDE.Windows extension, because it in fact is my desire to have that particularly, uh, essentially installed. And if I look at security, you can in fact get all kinds of recommendations and say, yep, this guy is definitely plumbed up to Defender because I want it to be. However, I've got a few servers and I've aptly named them No Defender 1 and SRV No Defender 1, SRV No Defender 2. And so if I click on one of these, and I take a look at server, you notice I've got that special tag that I called out in that policy. Whoops, let me go back here. No Defender 1 with a value of yes. If I look at its extensions list, well, in fact, we don't have an MDE extension, which is desired, right? Because I'm in the same subscription. P2 is enforcing that subscription, but the nice thing is the policy is keeping it at bay. So of the two of Defender, pretty straightforward stuff. To use that tag, again, it's all explained within this article, and there's other ways to do it through script and others, but this is really kind of my favorite, most elegant way, if you will, the easiest and most straightforward way to do it. Now let's talk about Defender for SQL. So let me go back to Defender. So Defender also has, not just for servers, but there's a for SQL servers, there's actually a Defender for SQL's extension that can also be lit up if you want to then protect specifically your SQL instances that sit on top of your Windows or Linux machines running in Azure VMs or Arc enabled servers. So again, I'm back in my environment settings, and I'm going to look at the different plans I have, and you'll find the SQL stuff under this databases dialog. So you can see I have it turned on, but if I go to dig into it and select types, so there's Azure SQL databases, the PaaS instances databases have that turned on. I've got open source relation databases that's turned on. The PaaS, this is the ones that we support, and even Cosmos and more PaaS things. But I also have this one called SQL servers on machines, and that means SQL servers that are Azure native VMs, as well as what they call quote outside Azure, and these are typically Arc enabled servers sitting on-prem, sitting in other clouds that happen to be Arc onboarded and deployed into the subscription. Well, the only toggle I have is off and on. So if I set this to on, it's going to deploy and ensure that that extension is employed and plumbed up to Defender and enabled on those systems. The bad news is I don't have, like I have for Defender for servers, which I showed you with a built-in policy. Unfortunately, we don't have a built-in policy to disable SQL servers on machines if this is turned on. So again, if I have the links in the blog, but if there's a link in here that talks, this article talks about, hey, how do I go about enabling Defender for SQL servers? And it's going to start by showing you, well, best way to do it is just enable the plan. And so this is going to walk you through exactly what I just showed you. Turn this on, make sure it's on, and nothing to do. But if I want to selectively not have Defender for SQL for my SQL servers within my subscription not enabled, well, it's different. Down below, it essentially says, well, look, if you don't want an all or nothing on the subscription, the way we say is, well, you have to disable it at that subscription level that I showed you. And then you have to then go in and just, per server, enable the Defender for SQL extension. And it shows you the steps to do that through the Azure portal. Well, that's not very helpful from a scale perspective. If I've got tens, hundreds, thousands of servers here, and maybe I'm onboarding servers a couple a month or a week or whatever, and how do I make sure that across my environment, those servers that I want enabled are enabled, and the ones I don't? Well, the first step is to disable this. Now, if you're in a subscription that already has this enabled because you want it, and it is enabled for all of the SQL on your Azure IaaS VMs. Turning this off won't actually remove it. Turning it off will essentially won't force an uninstall. It'll leave the stuff that's already installed there, so those should be fine. However, moving forward, you have to worry about the servers that come next, maybe tomorrow or next week, next month, and through time. That, hey, I want these servers turned on with Defender for SQL, but I don't want these servers on. So how do we fix that? Well, one way to do that, of course, is what they suggest in the documentation, which is, hey, just go in here, go to your system. So let's go to, say, my ArcBox. This happens to be a SQL server. And I can come in here and I can hit extensions. And you notice I don't have a Defender for SQL thing, but I can add it, right? And sure, I can do that. Great, but that doesn't scale very well. That's kind of hard to do in a real environment with lots and lots of things going on, different teams that are installing in servers, onboarding servers, etc. What I would suggest is you can use a combination and kind of the magic, if you will, of a little bit of scripting, a little bit of Azure Resource Graph query, and even maybe some Azure automation to maybe have periodically a very simple script to just look for those servers that I've tagged that I want this to be enabled. And if I don't find it enabled, go ahead and install it, right? And then run that on a periodic basis. So I've set that up just so. So a couple of these servers, this one included. So if I go to the overview of this, you'll see that I've strategically placed a tag on it called install def SQL equal yes. And what that basically says is this tag, I do desire Defender to be on it. And I've got a few other servers. I think there's another server down here. It's a SQL server called SRV Defender 1. And if I look at its extensions, you'll see that it, in fact, doesn't have the Defender for SQL. It does have Defender because I want Defender on it, Defender for servers, but it doesn't have the Defender for SQL extension on it. And it, in fact, is also tagged with install Defender SQL equal to yes. So how does this happen? How does it get it? Well, I've crafted a PowerShell script with some calls into Azure Resource Graph and some Azure PowerShell modules do just this. Now, I've created this script. I've used the power of GitHub Copilot as well as even Azure Copilot to craft this query. It really didn't take me this long. I'm not a wizard at ARG queries, and my old PowerShell skills of how to create loops and stuff has really kind of gotten very weak, if you will, since the several years when I did this a lot. But thanks to Copilot, I was able to craft this together pretty quickly, and I actually have this sample. If you want to do something similar, just drop what I have in here. I've got this on this simple GitHub repo, and I'll have those links in the blog as well that you can just kind of take what I've done and use to your heart's content. So what this does is, I'll just show this real quickly. I'm already logged into my subscription I've been showing. And so I'll just show this real quick. Let's just run the bits that run that query that I showed you, that Azure Resource Graph query, and show the results of that. So I'm just going to run that section of my script. And you'll see that, in fact, two servers returned. And the reason they returned is because they have a tag called install def for SQL. It's set to yes. And this fairly complex, and this is where I use Copilot, lean on it a lot, helped me craft this together pretty easily. Basically just says, hey, look at all the extensions that are on the servers with this tag. If you do not find Microsoft Defender for SQL, that's the internal name for that extension, you need to install it. So you're going to return that as a result. And if you look at the rest of this query, you can see what's going to happen. It's going to iterate through that list, that one server, two servers, maybe 10, 15, 50 servers, whatever happens to be. And it's going to do an installation of that extension. So you can see the extension call out here. That's the name of the specific extension that needs to be installed. And it's going to do this in an automated fashion. Now I can run this right here, and I can run it manually all I want, and it'll fix the problem. But what you can also consider doing is, let me go back to my portal here, is you might also consider running this through a runbook, an Azure Automation runbook in your subscription that I have right here. If I get to my subscriptions here. So notice I've got two. The only one, this one actually does the reverse. It's remove, but I'm going to concentrate on this one that's called install Defender for SQL. And what this does is let me show you, just so you know, it's basically the same thing I showed you in that PowerShell ISE. It's the same script. Use the security context, the principle of the runbook, and we have to make sure that that runbook principle has the role to allow, at least modified, that can add, remove extensions to my targets, right? In this case, my 2 Arc-enabled servers. But just basically run that query, give me the results, and then iterate through a loop to get the job done. So let's go ahead and run that. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go back here, hit refresh here. So this is I'm just going to run this manually. The nice thing is I can link the schedule. The automation account makes this easy. So if I just want to set and forget this, set it up for, hey, run every 6 hours, run every 8 hours, just to make sure as people are adding servers that meet the criteria but don't have the Defender for SQL, they will get it eventually upon iteration of the script. So I'm going to go ahead and start this, and off it goes. Now, it's going to take a few moments. It's going to sit in a queuing state for a few seconds or so. Once it gets there, it'll get to a start. And what we can do is we can watch this happen. So it's not going to take too terrible long. I only have 2 servers here. So I should be able to start refreshing the output. You can still see it's in a queued state here. It's starting up. And as we wait, just a reminder, what should happen is my 2 servers, and I'll just go to the instances here. So this server right here, ArcBox SQL, I'm looking at the SQL instance on it. If I go into it like right now, and I look at Defender for Cloud and see if it's connected, it in fact is not, because it's saying, hey, you need to enable this. And the same thing, if I'm quick enough, if I go to this one, it should say, hey, Defender for Cloud for my SQL instance, hey, you're not enabled, right? So I can't give you really any information, right? So what should happen here if we're successful is at least these 2 servers, because they have that tag, we'll then get the Defender for SQL extension. So let me go back to my runbook and hit refresh. And as you can see, it's starting. It's just basically showing me the output if I were to run that script manually, right? You're connected to the environment. It in fact ran that script. It actually found 2 servers that it should start the process of installing that extension. And so hopefully, if I give it enough time, we would expect to see it iterate through those. In fact, if I go back here, remember these guys weren't installed. So let's go to the machines of those Arc-enabled servers. So let's go to this ArcBox SQL. And let's now look at its extensions it's got. And yep, sure enough, it now has this Defender for SQL, right? And if I go back to the SRV Defender 1, and I look at extensions, hopefully, if it's not there already, yep, it's already there, which is nice. Remember that those 2 weren't there. So now if I, look at my instances and my SQL Server instances, and I want to look at ArcBox SQL, and I want to look at its Defender posture for the SQL instance, it now has stuff because it now has the Defender for Cloud server. And the nice thing about doing it this way is that, you can run this, and if no new servers have been added and everybody has the extension that needs it with the tag, well, it'll just run the query and stop. It'll run for about 10 seconds and go about its day. So that's it. So that's 2 ways. If you find yourself in this environment where, hey, I've got all this great Azure stuff and I've already adopted Defender, but now I'm trying to bring in my Arc stuff and I want it in the same subscription, but I want to selectively, at least for whatever my reason, not to enable Defender, either Defender for Server or Defender for SQL. We do have options and we do have ways in which we can allow that to happen. Thanks for listening.